This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios Podcast Network. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Thank you to all my patrons for supporting the podcast. If you too would like an ad-free experience of the podcast, become a patron at patreon.com/gracefulatheist. If you're in the middle of doubt, deconstruction, the dark night of the soul, you do not have to do it alone. Join our private Facebook group, Deconversion Anonymous, and become a part of the community. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/deconversion. This week's guest is Holly Laurent, the mind behind Mega the Podcast. Mega is revealing a brand new series that is absolutely out of this world. Mega is an improvised satire in the world of a fictional megachurch, and they are releasing a comedy investigative miniseries inside the world of their own show called The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills. The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills is a hilarious riff on the self-important truth-seeking that happens around church scandals and the twisted psychology of those who are inside them. This miniseries is chock full of ridiculous scandal. Put it this way, if you think that the real megachurch pastor improprieties we've seen over the last few years are bad, get ready for the outlandish hijinks of Pastor Steve Judson. If you're a fan of parody and satire, or a comedic take on what it's like to be in the middle of deconstruction, then go check out Mega and their new miniseries that comes out May 21st. The first episode of the miniseries, The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills, is out now. Go check it out. You can find them on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's show. On to today's show. My guest today is Holly Laurent. She is the comedic mind behind Mega the Podcast. Mega parodies the experience of the evangelical world with heart, compassion, and satire at the same time. Holly's brand of comedy, in her words, is doing comedy at the height of her intelligence and connecting with the audience on a deep level. Holly is one of those amazing people who can use comedy to communicate, to break down barriers, to get past people's defenses, because she's being honest and raw in that comedy. You're going to hear that now in this interview, that Holly brings this self-honesty to the table. That is what makes her such a great communicator. Here is Holly Laurent telling her story. Holly Laurent, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Very happy to be here. This is my favorite stuff to talk about. And I don't even know what your questions are yet, but I already know I'm going to love it.
Well, for like the two people listening to my podcast who don't know about Mega, can you give them the introduction to your podcast?
My podcast is a comedy, and it's called Mega, and it is an improvised satire from the staff of a fictional megachurch where we parody the powerful systems and structures in place in terms of what I consider kind of corny and cheesy mega world backdrop.
Yeah.
And every single episode we have a different comic who comes on and plays a different person who exists in that world, and we just improvise together and find a lot of really fun stuff. We laugh a lot. And one of the most interesting things that has come about from this podcast is it has brought me into a really delicious world of really wonderful people, of, ex-evangelicals and people who are deconstructing, and like a really lovely supportive community that I was not even aware of before my podcast, and which is really, really lovely. And it's sort of surprising to us at Mega that we have the audience we do, because I think half of our audience is kind of Christians who, I don't know, are probably like, we're the cool Christians. We can laugh at ourselves. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they're thinking.
Okay.
But and a lot of people who find themselves on the other side, people who have moved to being evidence-based people instead of faith-based people, or however they describe themselves. So I think, we have the feedback I hear a lot is that so many people find it to be incredibly therapeutic
Yeah.
to be able to laugh about some of this stuff. And you know what? Sometimes I hear from people who are like, I go through periods where I can't listen to Mega because I don't find it funny. And if I'm hurting, sometimes laughter helps during certain types of hurt, and sometimes it doesn't. And so we actually have our Patreon episode that comes out every week is called a mini. So we have the mega and we have the mini. And in the mini, we just play ourselves. We are ourselves. We're not playing characters. And we kind of deconstruct all the ideas that our characters are wrestling with in terms of content that comes on the weekend episodes of purity culture or scandal in the church and how it people of faith navigate that. But the way we approach it is that it's very Christopher Guest in its tone, I guess. It's very much like a Mighty Wind or Best in Show or a show like that where we're playing to the top of our intelligence and sincerely playing characters who are deep believers. And I believe we're playing them very lovingly and we're really humanizing them and we're exploring that point of view that me and my co-host Greg grew up with. I really got it got hammered home to say the least. And so I use my bilingual, I speak English and I speak evangelical.
Yeah.
I use my bilinguality. I think I made up a word to just create a specific backdrop that is really fun comedically. You know, a lot of like more specificity kind of creates like a universality in terms of comedic language. So yeah, we have a really good time with it. And I've enjoyed playing both sides of being the believer, exploring that point of view in a comedic way that at the very least makes people laugh or hopefully even might help people. And it's really for us, I come from a tradition of improv and comedy where where I believe the best way to make a statement about something or the best way to create a conversation is to be the thing that you have commentary about. Yeah. And because nobody really listens when you're on a soapbox, but if you can make someone laugh, a lot of times it can be really disarming, and then Absolutely. You're actually listening, or it opens up an opportunity for there to be some reciprocity or kind of an open dialogue. And I really don't have any interest in punching down at believers and taking swipes at individuals. I really am kind of I agree with oh man, what's his name? I'm having a pothead moment. George Carlin.
Yes.
I really agree with George Carlin that like I love people, I don't like groups. And so I'm not punching down at any individuals in any way, shape, or form. I'm really intentionally punching up at the power structures that really do kind of seek to control people and to oppress people, and that I really believe these systems cause deep harm, some harm that is becoming known to some, and some harm that is not even detected at this point, which is really insidious. And so that might be placing a lot of responsibility onto a half-hour comedy, but yeah, but
it's serious business.
That's where I am.
Yeah. Mic drop. We're done. Thanks. I want to circle back to a lot of things that you just said, but I really do first want to hear just a bit about your personal story. What was like for you as a believer when you really were a believer and growing up. And then maybe lead us through when the doubts came and what that was like for you.
I really always struggled. It's hard to say because of revisionist history and memory being very not trustworthy, but
and being honest about that fact. Yeah.
Yeah. But like every time you revisit a memory, it's like you open up that folder, make some notes, cross out some old stuff, make some changes and put it back on the shelf. And that memory keeps evolving through time. And I keep changing. I mean, I'm always changing. Like if we had this conversation on a different week, I'm positive the conversation would be very, very different.
Yeah.
And I'm really in that messy, and I may be in the messy part forever. I never have felt like, I've like a long jump where you land in the sand and you're like, that's where my feet are.
Yeah.
Mark those 2 footprints. That
Yeah.
is
I'm
me
done.
now.
It's all over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really feel like um my healing and my path is not linear. I feel like it's more shaped like the shape of the Milky Way galaxy, where it's just kind of a swirling thing with like arms that shoot out and then it comes back into the center and then shoot out again, and just a swirling kind of mass. That's what I feel like emotionally and intellectually.
Okay.
But the way I can describe, to the best of my ability, my memory of having grown up with a very I was in a high demand
Okay.
religious environment in terms of sort of a fundamental evangelical culture. Both of my grandfathers were pastors. So both my parents are preachers' kids. I'm a preacher's kid. My dad is currently the pastor of a megachurch, but used to be an itinerant evangelist
Mm.
that was traveling around the country bringing the good news of the gospel to high school assemblies and megachurches and county fairs and you name it. And before that, my parents had one of the first ever Christian rock bands. And so they,
Wow.
in their day, were considered very edgy and controversial. And, should you be singing about Jesus and it sounds like the Grateful Dead? Is that a problem? It was a problem for a lot of Christians. And
Yeah.
so my parents were kind of considered, I think, um, some like forerunners in the evangelical movement that has brought us, well, Trump, frankly, that
It's
has
all your
brought us.
parents' fault. It's all their fault.
I, I, I do blame them emotionally. But yeah, they were kind of at the beginning of that like whole Jesus movement, and this countercultural Jesus, long-haired Jesus dude who
Yeah.
loves you like you've never been loved before. And a lot of their generation, I think, really needed to feel some kind of that love. They came
Mm.
from parents who didn't talk, didn't touch, didn't affirm, didn't anything. And man, were they just starved for love. At least
Right.
my dad was. And that message really gripped him and transformed his life. And now it really feels almost like a love addiction or something. I'm really trying to know how to best navigate this relationship now based on where I've come. And until a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I wasn't even like publicly speaking about what I believed because I was so afraid they would hear it.
Right. Do I have this right that you actually traveled with your dad at one point when he was doing the itinerant preaching?
Yeah, like as a kid, I would go on the road with him a lot because if I didn't, we would never see each other because
Oh.
that was his like kind of full-time thing. So like in summertime, like if he was going to be the chaplain at like a youth group summer camp, he would take me along for the week, and
Mhm.
I would be wandering around the camp looking at all these like Christian church kids going to chapel every night and learning canoeing during the day. And um I got a perspective of both sides of the curtain. um, my father being a human being behind the curtain, and then being this really charismatic storyteller, counselor, communicator. People really, really responded to him.
Okay.
And so I watched the power of that performance. I think it sounds crude for me to call it a performance, but like at its deepest essence, I just don't think it's an accident or it's a coincidence that I also became a performer,
Mhm.
because I see a lot of similarities in it in terms of preaching and teaching
Yeah.
and performing. If I had to really sum up, I am an extremely highly sensitive person, just very, very, very sensitive.
Mhm.
So a lot of the messaging I was hearing, there was all the love of like, it's a love like you've never known. It's a perfect love. It's an unconditional love, all of that. I was getting that, but it didn't matter as much as all the messaging of simultaneously demons and
Right.
eternal torment of
Yeah.
hell and what I grew up believing was reality, which was my entire reality was based on God and Satan, heaven and hell, angels and demons. And the stakes were fucking high
Yeah.
because it is all eternity. I mean, I remember as a kid just wishing like, why couldn't he just like annihilate us? Like
Mm.
just pure annihilation would be compassionate, like why do I have to be in eternal torment and gnashing my teeth for all eternity, infinity, a sideways 8, that's forever of gnashing teeth. How will I have teeth left? Like a little kid
Yeah.
mind was just so terrified. And the word that really defines, I'd say, the first 3 decades of my life was fear. Just so afraid, so afraid. And all of that, to this day has been stuck in my gut and my hips. And I'm having to do a lot of work now, like physically and in terms of embodiment, and realizing that I have completely dissociated from my body because it was so sinful and dangerous and tempting and going to drag me straight to hell. And
Oh,
so I
man.
didn't enjoy it.
Yeah. Doesn't
I
sound like it was
thought,
pleasant. Yeah.
no, because I'm creative and imaginative and sensitive and emotional. So like every time I had sleep paralysis,
Mm.
which was a lot, like I had so many nightmares and stuff, but I would get sleep paralysis and I really thought they were demonic attacks.
Right.
I could feel like a huge, like, demonic talon coming out of the sky, the size of my body, and putting its point
Wow.
into my mouth, like during a sleep paralysis episode. And I watched my dad cast out demons as a kid with eyes rolled back and foaming at the mouth and guttural noises. And it took me well into my 20s before I was like, oh, people have seizures at music shows.
Mm. Yeah.
And that is the sound of a grand mal seizure, not a demon that is responding to the powerful name of Jesus being spoken in its presence.
Right.
So there was a lot of, there is still a lot of dismantling of a lot of reactivity that I think I have to all of that. It's really hard sometimes to have a compassionate and understanding view of someone who is still in the church and experiencing it as a good thing, because to me it feels like, oh, that abusive relationship I used to be in where they seem to be beating the shit out of me all the time. Well, I guess they're being good to their new girlfriend.
Oh, wow.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
uh
Ugh.
um yeah, so there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, like all of us who've kind of been through that stuff.
Several things, pop out of just that discussion. One is that I think adult Christians, I say that it's not that they take Christianity too seriously, it's that they don't take it seriously enough. And what you're describing is, as a child, you are taking it literally and seriously and experiencing the trauma from that. And I think adults are able to compartmentalize and, yeah, like, we believe this, but, and a child is not, right? The child's getting the main line of that and experiences the full brunt of it. And children suffer from that. And it sounds like, unfortunately,
Yeah.
that this was pretty painful for you.
It was. And the hard thing about that too is that um that's just going to be an individual journey, because there's really no telling them or helping them understand that.
Mhm.
I'm just a stark raving liberal feminist who's pissed
Right.
at a really lovely program, in their mind. And that's okay. It's also like same thing. You can't control the narrative after a breakup.
Yeah.
Their friends are going to think you're an asshole and your friends are going to think they're an asshole. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. That's a good analogy. I like that, actually, because that's very close to the reality. Yeah.
yeah. So I think, yeah, there's so much work to be done and I'm always doing it. I had a friend recently tell me that she was talking about in her relationship, her partner is sort of ruminating and talking about her parents all the time,
Mhm.
and the abuse and the destruction and all of that. And as I was listening to my friend describe that, I was like, oh, is that me? And then I was watching a rerun of Succession recently. Do you watch Succession?
I haven't yet. Yeah, no, I'm familiar with it, but I haven't.
Oh,
No,
it's so good.
yeah,
Yeah, I really like it. It's
yeah,
but there was it's basically like a parody of the Murdoch family, who
okay,
controlling like conservative news and being
right,
like horrible people. Um and actually that is like damaging the earth
yeah,
and like creating real real problems. And it's not just damaging humans, it's damaging the entire planet. But there was a scene that stuck out to me when I was watching it recently too, where the eldest son of Rupert Murdoch, of the Rupert Murdoch character, was in a new relationship with a woman, and she said to him, "You talk about your dad a lot."
yeah,
And I was
yeah,
like, And I've noticed that because my friend who I was discussing this with was like, I think that thing that you're ruminating about all day long that is sort of like running your thoughts and running the programming in your mind, that's your higher power.
mm,
And I'm like, interesting.
yeah, yeah,
I'm really working on changing my thoughts now, being more intentional, trying to be more mindful, and looking for ways to continue to liberate myself,
hmm,
because I do think the message of the gospel, according to most Christians, is love. But since I didn't experience that,
mm,
then I want to do a breakdown of what love is. So, what is love? Because if the story they gave me of what love is really created some harm, let me return to what love is then, because what is it? And it might be a different definition for every single person who describes it, but there are certain things I believe to be true about love, and one is that I think real love is a lot like truth in that it liberates. It it liberates.
hmm,
And so I'm just trying to get better at recognizing cages. And and as a kid, I remember having real infinite thoughts, at least to what me felt like bigger thoughts than the limitations of our own perceptions and the language that we speak. Like I remember as a kid when I learned the alphabet, I was like, okay, that's interesting. Now I know 26 of them. I can't wait to learn the rest because I figured it went on into infinity,
right,
like
right,
the way they say color does. Like, but our ability to see it stops at violet. So we essentially can see three colors and their variations, and we think that's it. But it goes on and on and on and on in the spectrum. And I remember my brain being like that. I remember our neighbors had kittens and we were playing with the kittens, and they were like, this one's a girl, this one's a boy, this one's a girl. And I remember having the thought, that's weird that they're all only boys and girls,
yeah,
because I figured that gender went on forever.
right, right,
And why would there only be two of all the,
yeah,
and and then I remember those outside forces of socialization and education coming in and immediately limiting my ability to think and speak. And everything became about limits.
hmm,
And I think the limiting nature of Bible based teaching, and I mean, if you really start, I think if you really start to break it down, it's everywhere. Like I at one point, in terms of a high demand religion, discovered that the cage had never been locked,
mm,
and that I could push the door open and I could come out. And I think for a long time, I pushed the door open and I would come out in short little stints and little experiments and then go back in and
yeah,
at least sleep in there at night,
yeah, yeah,
until the day when I realized like I can run. I can just run and be free and never go back to that cage. But I look around and I'm like, oh man, if you start breaking it down, and this is kind of why I want to go get my PhD in linguistics, is because I really think there's that at its essence that so much of our human angst is because of the limitations of the language we speak and our ability to think, and the ways in which we believe lies and we stay trapped and caged. Because if you look everywhere, the cages are everywhere. It's like, oh, late stage capitalism, cage.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
education system, cage. Like policing, that is a cage. Like there's so many of, and I remember having that thought as a kid. I remember thinking about money and being like, I think money is the problem. Like money, because everything revolves around money, like money is the actual problem. And then I grow up and to this day, I'm like, yeah, that is still the absolute problem. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah.
Anytime
Yeah.
a good movie gets made, it's despite the money people, not because of the money people. It's just, I know I'm like really, you jump in here
It's all
anytime because
good.
I'll
Yeah, I was
keep
going to say
spewing.
couple things. One, like, please go get your PhD in linguistics. I think you're on to several things there. You know, there are those theories about even just speaking multiple languages that you have a different perspective on things. So I think there's definitely something there about being a human being and being trapped in language. I do want to hear, though, about, you know, in your 20s, you're recognizing that it was about fear, or maybe in your 30s, and you're able to go out of the cage for a little while. Like, what was that experience like? You know, what were the things that let you be free, that let you escape, as it were?
Honestly, I owe a debt of gratitude to comedy. I would say comedy, I found myself in a little improv theater in Chicago where I started to feel community, connection, acceptance, belonging. You know, I'm just going to every improv class I can take and jumping in every show I can. And I remember distinctly in the beginning of my life in comedy, I remember thinking, I can't really be cast out from this. And that was a big fear that lived inside of me with imposter syndrome and all of this stuff within Christendom.
Yeah.
I always was like, oh, I'm a pervert. I'm disgusting because I'm thinking things I'm not supposed to think. I'm longing for things I'm not supposed to long for. Oh no, I'm a disgusting, wretched pervert. And I'm going to be found out. I'm going to be cast out. I mean, think about it. The very first story, I mean, besides Eve acting on her own will and then not just destroying everything for her, but for all humankind forever. Not just that story of a beginning, but even predating that story is Lucifer, who reading Paradise Lost recently, I was wondering if Lucifer is actually a sympathetic character, because
Yeah.
to question absolute authority is a good thing, and to demand absolute authority with annihilation as the only other option, well, again, annihilation would be
Kinder.
compassionate. Why? And again, why? A huge question I have is why? Why not destroy Lucifer and all of the fallen angels? And what I also discovered from reading Paradise Lost recently is that most of our ideas of Satan and the devil are actually from Milton and not from the Bible.
Yep.
There's actually very little in the Bible. And I kind of related to Lucifer in Paradise Lost when better to reign in hell than to be a slave in heaven. Like, that idea is really interesting. And I think there's a cool conversation to have there. And honestly, it's always been my natural bent. I'm very anti-authoritarian. People tell me it's because I'm Aquarius. I don't know enough about all that shit to speak to it, but I've always been and that's just I don't know. I don't even know what personality is per se, but it's always been my natural instinct is to, if you're my boss, if you're a cop, if you're in charge or whatever, my natural instinct was always to be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Like, and so
I have not been terribly good with authority figures either. So
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm like, and not that I want to be one. I just don't want to live in your fucking cage. So yeah.
A couple things. I'm going to jump in here and just say, we recently had a guest, Audrey, I think it was, who talked about, for her, the deconstruction was deconstructing the devil. And it reminds me of your story in that, like, you know, demons were very real in her growing up faith tradition. And it wasn't until she said, oh, the devil's not real, that it wasn't God that wasn't real, but it was the devil being not real, that her deconstruction process began and in earnest at that point. And so I think that's interesting that parallel with people who grew up in a more charismatic environment, that it's just recognizing that, oh, wait, this is kind of a story, this isn't actually
Yeah.
real. And then being able to let
Yeah.
that go and move forward.
I relate to that. I think that was a big part. That was a big Jenga piece that, when removed, helped the topple go down quicker.
Mhm.
Same for me with
Yeah.
Audrey. I think it was. I remember two things in college when I discovered that people in charismatic sects of all world religions speak in tongues. I was like, hold up.
Mm.
Hold the fuck up.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
what? And even like in satanic, I even learned that in satanic rituals they speak in tongues, and I was like, okay, wait. Like, that was a
Yeah.
huge one for me, where I was like, oh wait, is this from the inside out and not from the outside in? Because otherwise, the Holy Spirit is working with Satanists. And 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 also, yeah, I had a philosophy professor hand me a book called The Myth of Satan and asked me to write a paper on it, and I was like offended by the very title.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that was a big one. That was a really, really, really big one.
Yeah. Interesting. Since I'm here thinking about it, I think it might have been Stacy and not Audrey, but credit to both of them. Interesting idea. I do want to segue to comedy, and then first just to introduce myself to you. Like, I was the kid, my grandparents had HBO when I was way too young, watching Richard Pryor and George Carlin, you've
Ooh.
already mentioned, and Robin
Whoa.
Williams, and some of these early guys. And so comedy was just built into my life. All of my best friends from growing up is because we would just cap on each other. Like that. It's like we showed love by tearing each other apart incessantly. And so comedy has always been beloved to me. And I think that satire is such a deep way to communicate the subtleties of being a human being. And so I find what the work that you're doing, both as improv and as satire, super fascinating. And that you said it already earlier, that it is a way to get beyond people's defenses. So I want you to just talk about, what was comedy like for you? How did you get introduced to it? And like, when did you start to do improv?
I was forced into improv in college because of an acting class I was in, where my teacher had just done a Paul Sills workshop over the summer and brought back improv to our college campus and was like, we're going to be doing improv this semester. And I was like, oh no, I hate it. And then I was so scared of it, just because I had such crushing low self-esteem, and everything in improv is you. And so I was so afraid of being judged for anything that came out of my mouth. And so of course, having to face that drag. So I moved to Chicago because I kind of thought of it as the sort of mecca of improv at the time. Definitely, like, long form was really having its kind of punk rock heyday when I was in Chicago. So I signed up for every class I could and just was like, okay, let's face this
Mhm.
fucking dragon. And then, of course, in so doing, I discovered my little inner weirdo, my little comedic voice that I'd been telling to shut up for a really long time, because I thought it was the unacceptable side of me. It took me about 10 years. I remember I was working at the Second City. I improvised every single day and did every single show and class and tour and everything I could for a decade in Chicago, and finally got to the national touring company of the Second City. And then within 3 months of that, got put on the main stage cast, and then was able to write and run 3 different reviews for 3 years on the main stage, where I was doing 8 shows a week, 6 days a week. My absolute dream. Like,
Yeah.
please don't pinch me. I never want to wake up. And it was inside of that where I was improvising every single night and being paid for it and having equity insurance at the time. It was so great. And it was somewhere in an improv set where I was in I was in a scene with one of my best friends in the whole world, Edgar Blackman, and we were improvising, and I felt this thing come from my deepest waters. And it was a sensation that came up inside my body that happened simultaneously to a big laugh that I had just got from the room.
Mm-hmm.
And as I felt that really big laugh, I felt it affirm that deepest voice of like, I realized that that laugh had come from me being in flow and unconscious
Mm.
and allowing my little inner weirdo to speak. And that's when I stopped trying to improvise and I just started allowing myself to drop into that flow better and not do it like him or her or them, but me.
Mm.
And and that voice, the voice inside me that was always going to get me in trouble, and so I had to keep it under such lock and key. Speaking of cages, when I kind of started to let her out, I think that began the transformation inside of me that um, I guess I could call healing. I struggle to call it healing, but just changing,
Mm.
transforming, becoming, allowing myself to become the creature that I am. I guess that sounds sort of highfalutin and it's way messier than
Forward
that.
progress in
Yeah,
life.
forward
Yeah, yeah,
progress
yeah,
rather than the thing I thought I was supposed to be. All the shoulds, which are should just equals suffering.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so, there's lots of like with comedy, I think there's so many interesting things. Like the live comedy is my favorite because it's a little bit like being on a surfboard waiting for the sets of waves to come in. You're improvising like in stillness, 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 but you're watching like the waves. The waves that come to a surfer are very similar, I think, to the waves of laughter that come to a comic.
Okay.
And so you start to read those waves and figure out how to manage the placid water. And when do you want like little ripples? And then when do you want the big ones? And do you have the patience and guts to stay flat for a while to get a way bigger, more satisfying wave? Or do you want to? So all that stuff is really fun for me of like tinkering around with like what is funny, what is improv funny, what is sketch funny, what is film funny, what is live funny, what is funny that works the next night, what is funny that only works in that one moment.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that comedy, the way it's interesting because I've done a lot of research into why a lot of men think women aren't funny, and so much of it is like a deep unconscious. A lot of people think that laughter is there's a primal thing that happens when we are laughing together. We're showing each other our teeth, which is a very like primal animal thing when you show your teeth to each other, and that there might be something that is happening intrinsically in because we've all been raised in such a misogynistic and patriarchal society. Like there's something where men really don't like that. If I can make you laugh, essentially in that moment, I have controlled your body in a way.
Mm.
You're a little bit out of control. That like, like that was a like surprise and a physical response that was out of your control. So maybe you don't want a woman controlling you in that way, or maybe you only want a female to be, I don't know, fucking sexy and alluring or whatever. And comedy feels like it's too much of a leadership role in the moment or whatever. But I think what's happening is if I can make you laugh, you're in the palm of my hand a little bit because at the very least you're listening, which is the main thing that no one is doing now in our like highly divided times. And I have learned through incredible failure, I have learned that as you're reading those waves of laughter and you're timing those out and figuring like what ones to ride and how to keep moving the room, that a conversation starts to take place, this reciprocity of ideas. And it's a time where you can slip in, comics are supposed to be the truth tellers, like just pointing things out, shining a light in that dark place, shining a light in that dark place. How do we feel about this? Doesn't this seem kind of bizarre? And I think the really interesting thing to me is when the audience gives you the no's. The laughter a lot of times is yes, and the like ooh, the grunts and groans and the hisses are no's. And I've learned to now always look for those no's, because I'm like, ooh, okay, now we're getting to something, because you don't like that. Okay, why don't you like that? And what I've learned is, once you get those no, 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 not there, no, 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 you back up, motherfucker. I've learned that when they tell me to back off of something, that I've found an important thing. And so I don't often push past that point, but then I start to dance on that line and be like, well, then here's where let's talk about this. What else is here?
Yeah.
Because I think the goal is that you leave a comedy show feeling a little less alone and maybe a little less caged.
I don't want to get into too deep of waters here, but I am interested in your opinion on, I think comics today they kind of complain that they can't make certain jokes. And I think you're right that there's an element of comedy that is to say the thing that is uncomfortable for everyone to hear, and a bit of truth telling. And how do you balance that for yourself? Like you say, maybe not crossing the line, but going up to it.
Yeah. It's a tricky time. It's a really tricky time because, in the same way the stock market has to reset itself, so does comedy, and speaking of prior, some of that content is so harmful.
Oh yeah. No, yeah. Basically everyone I mentioned are super problematic in 2023 eyes. Absolutely.
Definitely. And I talk about this all the time with a lot of my friends in comedy of like, ooh, like, you remember how I used to start that one set?
Yeah.
I wouldn't use that word anymore, like yikes. And I kind of follow Sarah Silverman's ideas in that regard of like, in certain ways, holding someone's jokes from the 90s or the aughts or anytime, holding that against them is like trying to show, Shaq a picture of him as an 8th grader and be like, you were only 5'10", you were only 5'10", you were only 5'10". Why are you trying to be 5'10"? And he's like, I've grown.
Yeah.
Yes, that was me then, but I've grown. And I really look for that in the artists that I listen to and promote and take in, because as we know, looking at comedy right now, there's a lot of really I'm looking at a lot of mostly white guys, but not all, but of a certain age that are they're so disgruntled, and I'm like, what, and I'm like, come on, man, grow,
yeah,
keep growing. And but you see it everywhere. Like, it's the same problem with Fox News parents and liberal kids. Like, at whatever point you circle the wagons, then I guess it's just that's all you're going to get from them is where they draw the line.
Mm-hmm.
I really I really like I just heard a friend of mine, Mike Yard, do a set at the Cellar in New York where he told a joke about, like, all the school shootings it's a real problem in this country. We have a real problem and it doesn't seem to be going away. And I feel like we need to get creative and look at what might be perpetuating this real problem. And he was like, and I just want everyone to think about, I'm butchering this, forgive me, but like, let's look at the candle industry, because everyone goes and buys candles for these like vigils afterwards, and the candle companies are making out like crazy. And he, the audience kind of gave him a like, no, we're not allowed to laugh about school shootings. And he stopped in the moment. I was watching him do this in a clip. He stopped in the moment. He's like, no, that's a good joke. Like, that joke is okay. The target of that joke, like, we're not laughing about dead kids.
Right.
You have to understand target. And I really don't have any good feelings right now about people who target marginalized groups that are suffering. It really hurts me, because I guess, I want comedy to be my higher power. And there's cognitive dissonance too. Like, when you ask a Christian, like, how they feel about, the mass genocide of like Noah's Ark, and like why the 2x2 cute animal story and not like all the dead floating bodies of the
Yeah.
entire,
Yeah.
world. Even though I'm like, I think that was probably a region that got flooded. um,
Yeah.
that to the writer was the whole world. But anyway,
I do think it comes back to you talking about punching down or excuse me, not
yeah.
punching down and, punching up towards power structures as opposed to the marginalized and the disaffected. And that seems like a pretty bright line that's obvious to anyone who's listening for most of the time. But I agree
Yeah.
with you that we are having a bit of a reset right now, particularly in comedy.
And it needs to.
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the comics that we grew up on, using language and saying things and targeting groups that we really do need that reset. So even if that does make everyone in comedy, even the well-meaning people, like get in trouble and get canceled and get all that, like it's worth um, sticking with the conversation, wrestling and grappling with it,
Mhm.
and trying to keep going and elevating comedy to the height of your intelligence, with a sensitivity to that. Because, I mean, I even remember back in my training, like a lot of teachers being like, going blue is, sometimes if you get a dirty joke that hits really hard, it's great. It's worth it. But for the most part, just defaulting into going blue it's just hack. It's lazy. And so if having to be more intentional with our language and our content is what's required of the moment, like, great. That's a new challenge. Give me the sandbox of like sensitivity and transformation and evolution, over continuing to let something I believe in do harm, like, which is exactly my indictment of the church and people who, remain part and parcel of a murderous, harmful commerce in the name of love. Who really, I mean, if you look at all those individuals who are in church every weekend, each individual deeply believes like
Oh
this
yeah,
is a good thing,
absolutely. Yeah.
and every comic who is, pushing their content, they deeply believe that thing, or it's deeply hitting a nerve in them that is, making them obsess about it or whatever. But it's funny, like you mentioned Robin Williams, like when Robin Williams appeared in LA on the scene, like all the stand-ups were like, fuck him, that's not stand-up.
Hmm.
They were like, what is he doing? It's not, he's not. And then but he's Robin Williams,
Yeah.
like we have to let each thing like grow and transform and evolve and stay alive. And I think that's probably a lot of the suffering in and the angst inside Christendom right now is the cognitive dissonance of trying to maintain trying to continue to push a narrative of a God that is both like an authoritative genocidal dictator essentially,
Don't hold
and
back, Holly.
also
Don't hold back.
had it be like the most loving,
Yes.
the most incredible love that you've ever had in your entire life. Yeah.
I love the way you say to do comedy at the height of your intelligence. That's the kind of comedy that I enjoy, and I imagine that improv must be that every second that you are on stage. As a segue here, I want to hear the formation of Mega, the podcast. How did this idea come about? How did you collect the various comedians that have participated? And just tell us the story about Mega.
Mega kind of got forced on me.
Okay.
Well, not really. I wanted to do a podcast, and I pitched a whole bunch to this network, and they weren't going for anything. And then I had this in my back pocket, and I was like, I was kind of at a point where I was like, I don't want to think or look at or talk about that world anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was
Mm-hmm.
such a massive part of most of my life, and I'm really trying to move in a new direction. And but they were like, no, that's the one, that's it, make that. And so I kind of created a show Bible and like named the church and the world and the ministries and sort of like designed the format of it. And I recorded a pilot, and then it just kind of grew into itself on its own. And then during the pandemic, it kind of saved my ass because it allowed me to, when the pandemic hit, I was used to performing multiple times a week, and that had been for 20 years I'd been doing that.
Yeah.
And so then to not be performing anymore was a real blow. And so Mega kind of continued to itch that scratch. And then it also kind of introduced me to this new, really kick-ass community. And the way we get guests is we just, because of having come up in the improv scene, we just know so many incredibly funny people. And so we just started begging and borrowing from our friends and the geniuses of their minds and having a guest on every single episode. And yeah, it kind of became this thing that I'm really glad and grateful to it, because I think it forced me to stay reckoning with that part of my history, and continuing to try to have compassion for it and myself. And who knows, sometimes if I get really metaphysical and get stoned, I think, like, you know what, maybe in the journey of my soul, I don't
Mhm.
even know if I believe in like any of the Buddhist stuff, but like, let's say for the sake of thought argument, like that there is a journey of the soul, and let's say that you kind of do pick your thing, and I wish I hadn't picked the United States of America. I think there would have been cooler eras and places, but let's say, to put some agency in my soul, like, let's say I picked this, and let's say I picked high demand mind control cult to see if I could learn how to think
Mm,
and find it on my own,
yeah.
and explore the gray and not stay cozy in the black and white. And so I guess let's say that, to give myself some agency and not be a victim of it, let's say something like that happened metaphysically, then what does it mean? Because I guess I did do it. At least I got out of this cage. And so what does that mean? Does it mean keep uncovering cages? Does it mean I don't know. I don't know. But I did have a high thought recently of like, well, I guess if in that scenario there's anything maybe productive from exploring it as a thought experiment, is maybe it can give me gratitude for where I came from rather than angst and resentment, because everyone played their part perfectly so that I could play the game.
Mm,
Like the church and my parents and everyone, like the fundamentalism and all the, like, because like they believed it so deeply that I did.
yeah.
And so now it's really tricky to be in loving relationships with people who fundamentally see reality differently than me. That's really tricky, and it's also a part of why I'm so interested in linguistics. And I should be spending the rest of my life learning as many languages as I can, because our ability to think is based on the language that we speak. So I think somebody who speaks 10 languages can think 10 times more than me. And that's really interesting to me, because a huge part of it is, I'm like, is this semantics with me and my dad? I made a comedy, a short. I made a film that I wrote and directed called "Brought to You by Satan," where I explore the idea of, like, is it just semantics?
Okay.
Can me and my dad look at the exact same thing, and what he sees, he would describe as a powerful stronghold of Satan, and what I see as I stare at the exact same thing is addiction and abuse.
Yeah.
And who knows, when you're caught in the talons of addiction and abuse, maybe it does feel like a powerful stronghold of an invisible monster. I just don't know.
I really think that, that internet meme a few years ago of the dress, that just shocked people, that their perception was different, that one group of people was seeing blue and one was seeing gold, and like they
Yeah.
just could not believe each other, that there's no way you can't possibly be experiencing it that way. One of the things that I talk about a lot is that a deep human need is to be known, to be understood.
Yeah.
So you were talking about love. I think a definition of love is my ability to be authentically me and your ability to be authentically you, and to connect somewhere in the middle of that. That's kind of love for me. But it's that feeling of you're both having like you just said, the same experience, but your dad sees it as a powerful, lovely experience of love and transcendence and connection
Yeah.
with other believers, and you see it as a trap and pain and trauma and nothing good there. And and it's like, how do you reconcile those two perspectives? And I don't know. I guess me waxing philosophically, I think it is more than semantics. But one of the things that we gain being on this side of the bubble is one of my previous guests, Alice Gretchen, said it really well. I'm no longer good at fooling myself, right? I've gotten
Ooh.
less good at fooling myself. It's not that I'm impervious to fooling myself, but I'm less good at it now, having
Yeah.
been in the bubble and now out of it. And like, there's something to be said for being
Yeah.
aware, self-aware enough to recognize I can fool myself. I know what that felt like. It felt very
Yeah.
real for a long period of time. And now I don't want that anymore. And so I'm on the lookout to make sure that I don't do that again.
Yeah. And I recently heard someone say that attempting to change someone's mind is non-consensual. And I was like,
That's
oh
a good
yeah.
point. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that brings us back to the power of comedy and storytelling, which is um that is a place where it is a consensual connection.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So back to Mega for a second. You hinted at this, that first of all, it's spot on, right? Like, I mean, again, I know everybody who's listening has heard Mega, but if just in case you hadn't, you're right. You guys are playing full tilt Christianese, evangelicalism at it kind of peak, what is almost difficult to satire. You're doing it at this peak level, but there's a sincerity to it. There's a heart to it. It doesn't feel cruel. It feels very honest.
Oh, good.
And one of my questions to you is like, how does this not hurt you? How are you able
Yeah.
to do this on a weekly basis and not have that be re-traumatizing for you yourself, let alone maybe one or two listeners out there?
Oh, what a compassionate question. I really appreciate that. And the honest answer is that it does hurt me sometimes. I
Mm,
hear things tumble out of the voice of my character that bother me and hurt me physically.
mm.
And I'm doing really intentional work right now trying to get into my body as a human being, a lot of embodiment work. I'm in a class right now called Embodied Sexuality. I'm taking a dance class, which is absolutely terrifying for me. Dance is the most like never, not in a million years. It's I don't even like to go to weddings because I'm like, oh, is there going to be dancing? Because I'm so awkward and self-conscious and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to dance. I don't feel like I have rhythm. I'm so insecure. I'm all these things. And so I'm like doing all this work to try to safely come back down into my body. And sometimes when I hear my character Hallie say stuff, I feel pangs in my body. And
Yeah.
I'm like, ooh, I don't know. I've introduced other characters where I play Hallie's son Day,
Mm-hmm.
which is a adolescent male version of, it's basically me playing me as a teenage boy. And I really like those episodes. And I'm like, can I just change characters? Because his name is Day and he comes in as the skeptic and he's really wrestling with it on an emotional level and stuff. And Hallie, my main character, is toxically positive and completely trapped in a cage. And I'm trying to I have tried to play a really long game with her
Mm-hmm.
of her slowly kind of getting a little bit fucked up by her deep knowledge of the Bible, because one of my biggest indictments of most middle American Christians is that they are theologically illiterate and that they do not know what is in their book. And I do. And I, took Greek in college and used to be able to translate the New Testament. And I have really dedicated myself to grappling with this. And I feel like a lot of believers have not. And so with my character, I'm trying to use her deep dedication to biblical truths as a seed that is starting to grow inside of her, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to play it as a really long game of slowly breaking her down, because this podcast won't go on forever and we are going to end it at some point, and I'm like, how do I want to end it?
Yeah.
And and I'm feeling it in my body too, comedically, of like, oh, I used to chuckle at a lot of things she said, and now if I'm feeling physical responses to those ideas, even though I'm perpetuating these ideas in a comedic way, again, it's that it is your higher power, the thing you're focusing on, you know? And so how much do I want to give it and all of that? And same, like when people tell me like sometimes they go through periods where it's hard to listen to Mega, like that hurts me too. Even though I completely understand.
Yeah.
I completely understand. And I'm like, it hurts me to say it sometimes too. Yeah. So I don't know. It's a dance. it's a real dance. We
hear ya.
recorded, and I'm trying to find new ways of playing that long game with her, exploring other characters, and then yeah, we have a mini series that is a spinoff that's coming out that
Yes.
where I'm going to be able to play other characters too, and that's going to be really fun. It's a parody of the story of Mark Driscoll, this toxic, authoritarian style white guy who started a church and then spectacularly exploded it with his own toxicity. There was a Christianity Today podcast that came out last year. I guess that was massive.
Yeah.
Where they detail it's called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, about this spectacular explosion of a megachurch. And so we're going to parody that because we gotta.
So awesome.
And so far, I think it's going to be 4 or 5 episodes in total. And I've been working on editing the first episode, and it's really funny. And man, it is really, I think it's like, because it's a different format, we're able to take like much stronger swings, and we're being way more risky with it, and that excites the hell out of me. And I'm really, really, really excited about it. So it's all good because it's helping me, gestate whatever thing is next. I feel like what you're doing with this podcast is going to lead you to the next thing you do.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah.
So, Holly, this is how dedicated I am. I went and listened to The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill in preparation for this conversation.
Oh, wow. What did you think? Tell
Which
me
was
everything.
super painful.
Yes, it's painful, right?
There's just a couple of things I wanted to bounce off of you. So one is to give a little bit of credit. The Christianity Today, does try. They make the attempt to be self-aware and to self-criticize their movement. And that's about as much praise as I'm going to give them, because they also show throughout this, including the host, Mike Cosper, a just complete blindness to the larger factors, right? It's not just that Mark Driscoll is an asshole. It's that the structures are dangerous and hurting people. And then the other thing that I just found deeply painful was the advertising in between. So in this podcast that is about criticizing celebrity pastors, it'll just pop on this celebrity pastor podcast. Come join me. And it's just, oh my God, it was painful. It was
that's bananas, man.
Just the
talk about read the room.
I know, totally. Yeah. So, fascinating project all the way around. And I really look forward to listening to how you guys parody it. So,
oh, well, you sweetheart. I mean, I really hope that when our version, The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills, comes out, that you will, I pray that it will graft over, it will skin graft over all the burns from the Mars Hill one. It's so interesting. Full disclosure, David, I think I only got through 2 or 3 episodes because
I can imagine,
because my brain started leaking out of my ears when I would hear his voice from the pulpit. I was so filled with rage again that I was like, this isn't good for my body. I'm getting filled with cortisol.
Yeah. I think a few times, I'd be listening to it with earphones, and I'd, be walking around the house doing chores or something, and I'd be like, oh, come on. Family members would be like, what? And I'm like, nothing. I'm just listening to a podcast.
I know. So I think you'll really like, I don't want to give it away, but it's my favorite thing is that we give in our parody, we give the Mark Driscoll character,
Uh,
who is the lead pastor, the fictional lead pastor of Twin Hills, our church, Steve Judson.
okay.
We really give him a oh man, it's so funny. We come up with a pretty great way to to expose him as both an absolute degenerate
Mhm.
and also a big fucking baby.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think that's what all of these Jesus and John Wayne dudes are. I think they're big man children. And I have over the course of Mega, I have dedicated myself so deeply to continuing to stay in scholarship, like listening to Bart Ehrman all the time,
Mhm.
trying to educate myself about New Testament knowledge, context, understanding of the scripture, understanding like original manuscripts, understanding how text has changed, understanding, what does it actually say? What does the Bible
Right.
actually say about
Right.
homosexuality, about Satan, about all these things? Like I've dedicated myself so deeply to it. And lately I've found myself at a point where I'm like, this could change, but I'm like, I don't care
Mhm.
anymore. I don't care what's in the Bible. I don't care what it says about homosexuality. I could give a fuck. Like, I am looking for love. I'm looking for, again, liberation and excavating that. It isn't really doing it for me. And I'm afraid it can keep me kind of angry and in resentment rather than gratitude. And I'm really looking for ways to change my thinking and my higher power or whatever you want to call it. And it's interesting, even the word atheist,
Sure.
David, I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
God damn it, it centers Christianity.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
still has them centered. It's on our dollar bills. It's on in our constitution. It's in all. It's just so centered all the time anyway that I'm like, how do I move away from that as center and continue to feed myself with things that remind me that that system made me want love and need love and
Mm.
look for love and feel like I needed it so desperately. And that made me a vibration on this planet of need and scarcity.
Mm.
And that's also what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
And outside of it, I'm like, oh, I don't need and want love. I am love.
Mhm.
I have love.
Yeah.
I am this love. Like, I have it. Okay, I feel it. I'm trying to send out vibrations of like, there's love here. If someone was flying over and they were wearing love like goggles, like
Yeah.
green
Yeah.
light goggles or whatever, they would see a little beacon like down where my body is right now on this earth. It's like like
Yeah.
there's love here. Like I'm love. And so what I want to draw is I want to draw love to me by being love, not by being a desperate, sad, fearful, angsty, lonely, frightened kid
Mm.
who is grasping for um, God or a community that is promising that if you play your cards right. I want to be like, you know what? Fuck these cards.
Yeah.
I'm not playing this game. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go play another game. And again, I'm in the messy part of that. I haven't arrived anywhere, and maybe you and I should talk in a year and see if we're both completely different people.
Yeah.
Do you have any better words that you use? Like, not better words than atheism, but like more words?
Yeah. This whole podcast is what I call about secular grace, right?
Yeah,
And
I love that.
this is the idea that the horizontal. I recognize that what we love about grace, the agape in the love in the Bible, is actually people connecting with each other. And when you start to look at even miracle stories, right? Even miracle stories, often it's like, oh, well, this first responder showed up out of nowhere and saved me, or this nurse took
Yeah.
the time to help me out, or this person gave me $10 when I was hungry. There's always another person involved, right? And it's this, and it's just the recognition that it is human beings being good to one another that is is the thing that we crave, is the love
Yep.
that we've been trying to describe and
Yeah.
go after.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The language is hard. I call myself a humanist, but that
Yeah.
can be misconstrued as well. And, I don't think there are good words for it. So I use a whole
Yeah.
bunch, and I say, yes, I
Yeah.
am an atheist, but that is kind of boring.
Yeah.
It's that what I believe in is people, right? Like
Yeah.
I believe in people, and that's the thing that you need to know. And so I'm constantly on the lookout for better words as well. So if you find any, let me know.
Because we are really limited. We're not
Yeah.
only limited to like our perceptions and our senses.
Mhm.
Like we're living in 3 dimensions, and we have 5 senses. So that's a pretty tight sandbox.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like I don't know, there's part of me that's like, there might be something. I don't know what the Hadron Collider and CERN talks about the God particle, and
Mhm.
I wish they wouldn't call it the God particle, but there is something that is binding everything, and I agree with you that it's connection, and I think that's actually at the heart of your the thing you're scratching at with comedy is like, comedy is just connection. It's human connection.
Yeah.
And surprise. It's basically like you're connecting with me for a few moments, and then I'm going to make you breathe differently by little elements of surprise.
Right. Right.
As we're connected. And yeah, and I think that's what improv is. And I used to always tell my improv students back when we still had improv theaters and training centers before the pandemic, like, that improv is just about connection. It's
Mm.
about you. I tell everyone on the first class all the time, and they never believe me, but I'm like, I'm going to tell you the secret to improv, and you won't believe me. But if you do this every day for 10 years, something will kick in, and you'll be like, oh yeah, that's true. Is that the secret of improv is listening. That's
Mm.
it. It's just listening. And people's biggest difficulty is getting over that hurdle, because your inner monologue is so loud, because you're so self-conscious when you're being observed. And when you're putting pressure on yourself to be funny.
And
So
literally on stage. Yeah.
on stage, which is, obviously it's the Seinfeld joke of people would rather be in a casket than, giving the eulogy. But like, so you're overcoming all these like great fears, or you're not overcoming, you're working inside of great fears and doing it anyway. And, but it is about listening. It's just about listening. If you just breathe and listen to what your partner's saying and respond to it, and then it just becomes a multi-layered like listening exercise, where you start to have to listen to yourself, listen to that inner weirdo, listen to that like that whatever that little deepest authentic spark of you is, like listening to that, listening to the audience, and listening to your scene partner. And if you can combine those levels of active, conscious listening, because most of us, I think, we think listening is the way we listen is actually waiting. We're waiting for our turn to talk.
Yeah.
And waiting for your turn to speak is not listening. Like what improv and comedy taught me is that like deep, active, conscious listening is a posture and a willingness to be changed.
Interesting. Yeah.
and that is listening. And when two people are doing that, they are connected, and then that connection is the spark that makes magic and makes us laugh.
Well, I think I think we have to wrap there, because I think you've just describing comedy in the same way that I talk about what we're trying to do here on the podcast. Is like, in these interviews, as people are telling their story, there are moments, like you talked about the wave, right? I can feel the moment of, oh, that was good. That's going to connect with the audience, right? And it's
Yeah.
generally about being honest and vulnerable, and again, authentically yourself. So I'm going to take that from you and and run with it. So thank you for that. We're not certain about the release date for the parody, so I will hear from your publicist when that is, and we'll publish. We'll make that abundantly
Fantastic.
clear in intro and outros. But how can people reach you? How can people find Mega? How can they connect with you?
My website is hollylaurent.com, and same on Instagram, but megathepodcast.com, and Mega the Podcast on the socials. And yeah, I have that Brought to You by Satan short film on my website and all
Okay.
that.
All right.
So yeah, listen, rate and review Mega. It helps us so much. And um, love yourself and start to be love rather than need love. And we're gonna transform this place. We're gonna make things better.
Amen, sister.
Yeah. At least we'll have a little bit better of a human experience we're not exactly sure why we're here, but here we are.
Mm.
And if we can help each other and help ourselves suffer a little less, then I say hell yeah to that. And thank you, David, for such a thoughtful, lovely conversation. I really,
awesome.
really dig you, and I really have enjoyed this, and the pleasure has been mine. And anything that you take from this, I feel like that's a gift, and I'm so happy to give it to you. So all the best.
That's awesome. And I might take you up on a year from now. Let's check in with
Let's
each
do it
other.
again.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I would love it. This is my favorite shit to talk about. I mean,
Yeah.
I could go on and on and on and on and on. And maybe I'll be like starting my linguistic program by then.
Yeah.
And I'll be writing a dissertation on the nature of reality as defined by language.
Final thoughts on the episode. My all-time favorite interviews are with comedians. I've had Karen Aaliyah from the Deconversion Therapy podcast. I've had Leon Lord, who's a stand-up comedian, and now Holly Laurent from Mega the podcast. These are always my favorite interviews because I think comedians have insight into human nature that is at least significantly better than the average pastor. What I think makes Holly in particular very good at satire and comedy is the honesty that she brings to the table. Her story is gut-wrenching. Growing up traveling with her dad in evangelical circles, recognizing it as performance, her seeing herself because she was a woman as threatening and bad. She talked about as a child, demons were real. And the trauma of that is evident even today. But it's that realness, it's that honesty that makes her improv so powerful and so good. I think that's why Mega the podcast is so ultimately successful. Although it's absolutely critique and satire, there's also heart and compassion and recognition in the characters. The first episode of the new miniseries, The Rise and Fall of Twin Hills, has just dropped. I'm going to be checking that out shortly. But the subject matter, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, about Mark Driscoll, is very target rich. So I expect that it's going to be absolutely amazing, and you should check it out. I want to thank Holly for being on the podcast, for being rigorously self-honest, for sharing with us her story and her comedy and her incredible mind. I love the way she said she does comedy at the height of her intelligence. We're going to talk about the human connection part in the secular grace section of this podcast. But thank you so much, Holly, for being on and sharing your story. The secular grace thought of the week is human connection. How could it not be? As I've said now repeatedly, I'm a huge comedy fan, and it is so powerful to hear Holly talk about comedy, and improv in particular is about that connection, that improv is about listening, active listening, instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. With in her words, a posture of being willing to change. That's brilliant. Holly said the connection is the spark. And she talked about anticipating and riding the waves of laughter and being willing to sit in the quiet time before that happens to get the better laugh. I just love everything about that conversation and her perspective there. What this podcast, the Graceful Atheist podcast, is about is human connection. So many things that we call spiritual are just about human connection. When you think back on your church experience, what were the good things? Was it the sermons? Was it going to the building? Or was it the potluck afterwards, the coffee breaks, going to IHOP with friends? Was it somebody who cared about you when you were sick and they came to your house and brought you food. The entire point of secular grace, of my brand of humanism, is that it is human beings being good to one another that is this spark, that is this thing that we are searching for. It's what we are referring to when we say connection in the transcendent sense. I don't mean to imply that it is mundane, but I do mean to be explicit that it is not transcendent. It is just people. And that's fantastic. You don't have to believe anything. You don't have to force yourself to accept unwarranted truths. You can just love people and be loved by them and experience that sense of transcendence, that sense of spark and connection. Next week, Arlene interviews Shifra. That's going to be an amazing conversation. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. The beat is called Waves by Mackay Beats. If you want to get in touch with me to be a guest on the show, email me at gracefulatheist@gmail.com. For blog posts, quotes, recommendations, and full episode transcripts, head over to gracefulatheist.com. This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast, a part of the Atheist United Studios podcast network.